Hey beautiful peoples, this is Kim with Abundant Life Tarot. Thank you so much for joining me. And today we are talking about the dark side and the bright side of collecting decks. And I have been really giving this topic a lot of thought, so much thought in fact, that I am creating or building a course around this topic. So I thought it would be most appropriate to highlight some of the bright side of things with collecting decks, and then some of the not so bright things of collecting decks. And then obviously we get to discuss all of this in the comments section below, as well as in the private Facebook group Abundant Life Tarot. And you can head on over there, join the group, and get in on the conversation there as well. All right, I made some bullet points on my very colorful index cards, so bear with me as I go through them because I don't want to miss any points on both the bright side of things and the dark side of things. We'll first start with the bright side of things. Okay, so number one, nothing is better than scoring the perfect deck. Nothing, right? I mean, I feel like every single time I have found that perfect deck where it's that aha moment where you saw it in a Facebook group that someone talked about and you're like, I never seen that deck before. Let me learn a little bit more about it. And so then you start to learn a little bit more about it on the website, on the different YouTube videos, on Instagram. And next thing you know, you're sucked in. Yep, you got sucked in, and now you then went and scored the perfect deck. But how many times has that happened, right? So it's a phenomenon that fortunately keeps happening over and over again. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure there is probably some contrast to the bright side of that. But let's live in the moment of bright side. Doesn't it feel great to find that perfect deck and connect with it even in the courting process of it? I court all of my decks. And what I mean by that is every deck that I bring into my collection, there is a moment where I am stalking that deck. I am looking at it online. I am fantasizing about it. I am Googling it, YouTubing it, all of it. And so, yeah, scoring the perfect deck feels amazing. So that is definitely a bright side to collecting decks. Number two is the camaraderie with other tarot and oracle or Lenormand deck collectors is priceless. To be able to connect with someone on such a personal hobby as tarot is amazing, because it tends to be a solitary type of practice. And even collecting decks can be kind of solitary in and of itself. But now that we have social media to help connect all of us, it's really amazing how we can be able to connect with other people, other like-minded people. And I enjoy that immensely. That is certainly a bright side to collecting decks. Also, what's amazing about collecting decks in this time period is that many of us have a very diverse and abundant collection. I feel like there's a lot of representation in my collection of many different people, of different, backgrounds, colors, sizes, whatever their sexual identity, whatever their sexual preference. All of that is definitely represented in my personal collection, and I've seen that in many other people's collections. And so that's another bright side to collecting decks, is being able to bring in an abundance of different kinds of decks, of varied bits of artwork. I feel so lucky that I have all these different bits of artwork in my home that I can pull out and look at any time. So that is a bright side to collecting decks. Along with that, is there's many choices out there. There's so many different choices to your to what you could add, right, to your collection. There's so many choices. There's so many mass market produced decks out there that's dizzying. There is out of print decks that you can start to hunt. There is independently produced decks, whether they are on Kickstarter, in Indiegogo, or maybe they're on Etsy, and maybe they're on a creator's website. And, you know, there's so much choice out there. There's so many different decks to choose from. And it can be daunting, but choice is such a beautiful thing to have. And so that, too, is a bright side to collecting. And let's see. Okay. Yep. Along with that, today it is easy to score a great deal, especially with mass market produced decks. When they are massively produced, it drives down the cost. So it makes it easy for these big publishers to crank out the decks over and over again. So I don't have to worry as much with mass market produced decks, and I can just buy with, you know, with little concern about it really impacting my pocketbook. And so that's a cool and bright side to collecting, is that, you know, in terms of collecting decks, if you were only really collecting mass market decks, and if you kept it at a modest number, it wouldn't really hit your bank account like some other hobbies and interests could. So that's a positive, I think. I think that is a positive. If you manage your deck collecting habits, it could totally be something that is not that expensive. Truth, really and truly. Because when I think about all the money that I've spent over the years on my habit, it really isn't that expensive. I mean, to some people's habits, yes. But to, like, my friends who collect designer handbags, no. Okay. So, one day, the decks will be worth something. So I had to put that down as a bright side of things, because this is true. Some of my decks in my collection may be worth a few dollars, and that is a plus and a bright side to collecting. All right. I like this one. A hobby that is something to brag about. I mean, to even have a hobby these days is something to brag about, let alone to be like, kind of like, I collect fancy tarot decks and oracle decks. I don't know about you, but I have a hobby. That feels really good. I love being able to say, yeah, I have a hobby, and it is all consuming, and I love it. And I could be around my cards all day and satisfied. So that is definitely a bright side to collecting decks. And I like this one a lot. It is straight up comforting to be around our decks, right? I look at some of my decks like little friends, and I know logically these are inanimate objects. These are not, what do you want to say? These are not friends. These are not people, but they are. And it is comforting to have a lot of decks to say, you know what, when I need this situation, I can consult X decks. When I need this situation discussed and dealt with, I can go to this deck. That is definitely a bright side to having a collection of decks. And then it's straight fun to collect. And I think one thing that I didn't put on here, but actually is like number one, and I apologize that I didn't actually have it on my list, but that's because it was meant to be number one. But before I say the number one spot, we're going to say this last one. It is straight up fun to collect decks. Bottom line, there's definitely that rush of purchasing the decks and hunting down the perfect deck, finding it, trying to get it going through trials and tribulations. Maybe it was shipped overseas, and It went through a treacherous ride across, the ocean to get to you. And it's got a story to tell. Even the deck itself has a story to tell. And that is even cool. The whole experience of getting that deck is cool. So that is a bright side of collecting, and why I will always be a collector at heart. Yes, I'm in a depth year, but does that mean I'm never going to get decks? No. And even this year, decks still were blessed upon me. I still were gifted decks by friends, and I had a soul deck that needed to come into my collection that was on my wish list for years. So so that had to happen. So, I'm not ever going to knock it. But is there going to be times when I'm not really acquiring decks? Yes. And it is straight up fun to collect. But number one, the bright side to collecting decks is supporting deck creators. And that is why I was like, that's not on here. But that was because I meant to add it as number one, and I forgot to add it. But it is number one. It's just at the bottom. It's so amazing to be able to support an artist and a writer and a deck creator, and however they show up, whether they're tarot readers or not, and they just want to give the gift of their beautiful deck into the universe. There is something so beautiful about the exchange of being the person who pays for that deck and receives it, and from the deck creator, that dynamic, and then the beautiful birth of the deck, and that the whole exchange is amazing to me, and I love it. And I never want that to end. As long as people want to create in that way, I want others to want to continue to partake in all of that. And yeah, I may be in a depth year. I may not necessarily be buying decks right at this moment, but that may not change. And that doesn't mean I can't still support projects and support people, and I'm going to do better, I think, for myself. I am a YouTuber, a small YouTube channel, but I could be able to spread the word about decks. And I've always said that, I want to be more proactive and like seeing more who's out there making decks and getting the good word out, and trying to be more proactive about it. I see them, and sometimes I'm like, oh yay, and then I move on. No, I should pause for a moment and at least talk about it and share it. And I try to, and share it on my Facebook page, for example, or on my YouTube channel. That takes, if I'm already doing content, I could do that. So I think we all could do better about that. And because there are people who are in acquisition mode, there are people who are acquiring decks, and then there are some of us who are in a moment where we're not acquiring as many decks, and that's okay. That's the season we're in. That's okay. So that is the bright side. So I thought it's definitely important that I talk about the bright side, and I think first, because now we're going to go a little bit into the dark side, and we're going to talk about the dark side. And I actually have 2 little index cards for that. So the first aspect of the dark side is fear of missing out. So I know I've made some purchases because of FOMO, fear of missing out on the deck of a lifetime. All of them are deck of a lifetime. All of them, like I'm telling you. But as I'm doing this deck year, they're not all deck of a lifetimes, and I'm like, oh, now I have to really pause and think about, do I really need that deck? Does that really need to go on my wish list? I was adding a bunch of decks on my wish list like in the last couple of months, and then I kind of paused again and was like, I'm going to go back and see later on if any of those need to stay or if they need to go. But before I do that, I kind of want to do my analysis. I'm going to do a 6-month analysis of my depth year and compare and contrast to where I am at 6 months into my depth year versus where I was at in 2019 and 2018, 2017. You get the picture. So I'm going to do an analysis. And I know that when I was going through some of my spreadsheets and looking at the decks that I've acquired, some of them came because I was afraid that I was going to miss out on a first edition deck and I was going to be sad for it forever. And there is some truth to that. I possibly could be really sad forever, but not really, right? There's a couple of decks that have gone out of print since I've been in my depth year. And I was like, oh, shoot. Oh, I missed my opportunity. But I missed my opportunity to get it easier. Not necessarily not to get it. Now the universe is going to have to get a little creative in giving it to me. But you see how I can shift my thinking around that. But at first where I was at was like, oh, I had some decks go out of print on me. Dang. But I was like, you know what? I got some other expenses going on in my life right now that I should probably tend to. So, it's okay. That deck will come. It will happen. It will happen. So, sorry, I'm fixing my necklace. So, fear of missing out. So that's the dark side for me. It's a dark side. I don't like it. I know a lot of people like laugh at the whole like, oh, FOMO, but I don't really like the whole vibe, and I don't want to be a part of it. And I love the depth here for the fact that I don't even have to be a part of it. And I might have to make it an 18-month depth year because of it. Moving on, I don't have numbers, but moving on to the next bullet point. Jealousy and deck lust, which kind of ties into FOMO, right? So then let's say the deck does go out of print and you're like, what? And you see so-and-so on that big Facebook group and they're just showing it off, just showing off their deck. Like, just what are they doing? Why are they showing off their deck like that? Oh my gosh. Who do they think they are? I know none of us do that. But it's there sometimes, that deck lust. Maybe not to that extreme, but there is some deck lust there. That's why I had to I had to back off a little bit from watching YouTube videos for a while and going on Instagram for a while and Facebook too. I had to back off a little bit while I was really going through my withdrawals with my depth year. But once I got past a certain point, I was like, oh, I can be around other decks and not really have deck lust. And if I have deck lust, I'm like, oh, it's like appreciating a really cute, fat, chunky baby. You're like, oh, how cute. Oh, but nobody wants to talk about how you were in labor for so many hours for that baby. Nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about how you stay up with the colicky baby all the time. All people see in that image is a cute fat baby in a cute little outfit and looking happy as a clam. But just like that with the deck, no one saw that you had to send the deck creator like 2 messages because you hadn't heard anything for like a year. And you're like, what's going on with this deck? Or maybe the deck shipped on time, but it got lost. And you're seeing everybody else's decks come in, and you're like, where the hell is mine? No one knows about those moments. So, yeah. So I thought that was a fun one to add to the dark side of collecting is jealousy and deck lust. Another one is overspending, all tied together, right? So again, FOMO and deck lust drives overspending. And so if you're making purchases from that kind of energy, you're definitely going to overspend because you're going to probably end up with decks in your collection that really don't resonate. That really, even if they kind of resonated, you just aren't even that drawn to the artwork. So you don't even want to use the deck. So now you've overspent because now you got decks in your collection that you're not even really connecting with. It's different to really study and like try to not study, but you know how you research a deck for a while and you finally get it, and when you get it you're like, I'll use it later, and you really, there's something about that deck that you connected with, but you put it on the shelf. There's something different about that than deck lust or FOMO kind of being the driving energy of why you made that deck purchase versus you research, you finally get the deck, then other decks come in before that deck. So you kind of, that one gets shoved to the side. Chances are later, that deck that you researched and you loved on before it even came to your collection, you will eventually come to use it. You will eventually come to appreciate it, or you might even give it to a loved one that you say, you know what, I didn't get a chance to really connect with this one. but I know that it's a good one because other people love it, and I just didn't get a chance to use it. So here you go. It could be that. But then there's that, buyer's remorse of the one where you're like, oh, I just got that because I didn't really want it to miss out on that first edition. I didn't want to miss out. And now overspent. So that's definitely, to me, a dark side, because sometimes people are putting these decks on credit cards. No judgment. Hey, no judgment. But sometimes you're spending money, and we all have been there, right? All of us. You're spending money you probably shouldn't be spending on a deck. I see it all the time in Facebook groups. Oh, I know I shouldn't be spending this. Oh, I know I just got paid. And it's like, did you really need that particular deck? Oh, I went crazy again. But again, no judgment, because we all are sometimes in a season of acquisition. So my deck course will analyze and have a tarot spread to look at, is this, what's motivating that deck purchase? That's some shadow for you. Okay, so another, and they all stack up on top of each other. Another dark side of collecting is hoarding and then not using decks. And we kind of touched upon it, right? Having a bunch of decks in your collection that you are not using. It happens. It happens to the best of us. It happens to me. We have that happen. But if it's consistently happening on a very frequent basis to the point where you got decks upon decks that's either wrapped up or you touch once, they're not even shuffled, then maybe it's time to just say, hey, let me pause and look at what I got going on. Maybe it's time for me to move some decks along. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe I keep this one for myself. Maybe I let this one go. Just seeing what season you're in. That's all that my course is really about. What season am I in is where we want to, where we're trying to get here. It's not about persecuting you for getting decks. Y'all know I have a collection. So I'm not the one. I am a maximalist. As hard as I try to be a minimalist, I am a maximalist. But with that being said, you can still maximize on your experiences and not have to maximize on debt, and not have to maximize on a bunch of decks crowding you, and with your hoard of decks everywhere, falling around, falling off the shelf as you're trying to get to one in the back, or if you're not even trying to get to the one in the back. So, and not using them. I hate that. I hate the concept or the thought of my decks sitting on the shelf for not months, but years of not being used. That bothers me. Which is why in my community, when we finally open up, again, I'd love to have like a little library. I think the library said that I could teach there, and I think what I'll do is have a library of decks. Not all of my decks, not all of my high-end ones. Well, some of my mass market, and I might check out decks, meaning people can check them out, bring them back, let other people use them, and I'm going to be teaching in my community with the library, so I'm excited about that. But that kind of came to an end because of COVID-19, but we'll see what happens. We'll see. All right, so this is a fun one. Another dark side of collecting is waiting for decks to release. And even mass market decks can take a long time to release once you hear about them. Like you hear about them on Instagram, you're like, ooh, I want that deck. I want that deck. And you're like, okay, it's going to be on US Games. I'm going to hold out on it and I'm going to wait. Well, you might wait a while. Now, fortunately, with mass market, usually if they say they got a deck coming out, they're going to put it out. When you are waiting for an independently produced deck, you've got to bring your patience game. And not everybody's patient. And sometimes I'm in a patient season in my life, and sometimes I'm impatient as hell. And I have no business, dealing with any kind of waiting. And so now I know that about myself. So now I'm not going to get tangled up in waiting for a deck to be published. So the dark side of that is waiting. Not everyone wants to wait. Some of us want instant gratification. Yeah, sometimes it could be bad, where you constantly need instant gratification. But on the other hand, if you know that about yourself, that's, and then what happens is, I know I was in a space for a while where I was backing decks long term, knowing that they were going to take a while, but in the meanwhile, getting decks in the meanwhile. And so in the meanwhile, I'm collecting decks, spending money, and no, it's just no. It's like, now I'm like being more realistic, like looking at, if I'm going to back a deck, I'm going to look at, okay, how long is it realistically going to be finished? And then making an informed decision from there is all I'm inviting people to consider doing with that. So that is the dark side of collecting, because you may be waiting for a while. You may be also waiting for that perfect out of print copy to come up. It may take a while for that deck to come into your world, your universe, where you're going to be able to get it. My Gaian Tarot, first edition Llewellyn. I always say that because I got to be like, y'all knock Llewellyn cardstock, but no, not for the riffle shuffler at heart. You love you some old school Llewellyn. Let me just say, I'm saying. I just think that it can be challenging having to wait if you're not in a space to wait. And sometimes maybe at one point you were cool with waiting, and now things have shifted and changed in your life. You ain't cool with waiting. And so if again, it's like you may not know that now, but I'm just planting that seed that can sometimes happen. So knowing that, maybe just with your purchases, pay special attention to when deck creators plan on having the artwork completed if it ain't already done, and the guidebook already done if they're going to have a guidebook, and then making an informed decision from there. Just saying, because it'll save you heartache. Let me tell you, it will. Okay, next one. Tying along with that. I love how I just tied them along. Dealing with temperamental creators and delays. This tends to be more with the independently produced decks. Creators have lives, and I get that. They have other things going on, other creations being birthed. I totally get that too. But some creators are able to navigate the creation process a little more efficiently than others. So the dark side to collecting is you better bring your patience, and you better make informed decisions when you're making purchases or investment decisions. Because if you are backing a deck that has not yet been published or created into a physical deck, right? You are an investor, and it is a risk to invest. And so it may take a long time to see a return on that investment. Bring your patience, is all I say. Or don't invest, or make very informed decisions about your investments. That's all I'm saying. That's it. It's nothing to knock creators. But sometimes you're going to deal with some who are like, I don't feel like working on my deck right now. I don't feel like doing the artwork right now. I don't feel like dealing with nothing about this deck. I don't feel like, and I get it. Let me just say this. I get it. That's why I probably wouldn't be brave enough to do a Kickstarter, because I'm like, y'all ain't gonna give me y'all's money and be having that hanging over my head. No, you will not. And so I'm from the school of thought I would probably just either publish with a big publisher, or I would self-produce is probably what I would do, because I would be a little too nervous about it, because I know how I am. I know, like, it might take me a few months to get that deck done. It might take me years. It might take me decades. I don't know. And I don't want that pressure. So it's frustrating sometimes when you encounter creators who take that on and don't really give that forethought about that for themselves. And then they get themselves in a situation. And I just don't like to see damage to their brand or their business behind things like that, because it's not even necessary. Communication is key. I always say that. And so it's just a frustrating situation for everyone involved. So it is a dark side of collecting, especially if you pride yourself on only having independently produced decks in your collection, and you are wanting that. You want to be that first one to have that brand new deck, so you could be like on Instagram or on YouTube showing it off. Well, sometimes you might have to wait, and that's okay. That's okay. But just know that you're going to have to wait. So that's it. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Oh, you know what I just realized here? I'm sorry, guys. I did have supporting artists and creators listed here on the bright side. I don't know how I missed that. But I knew I wrote it on here, or intended on writing it in, but I wanted to make it number 1 because it is number 1. Sorry, I digress. I was just looking at it and I'm like, oh, am I crazy doctor-ish handwriting there? I see it. Uh-oh, is there time for readers? I don't know. Might be time for readers, or it might be time for me to be off on my stay-at-home order already, so I can go out and stop going stir crazy. All right. So yeah, that is tough. I've seen some temperamental exchanges on Kickstarter too, where the creation has gone into years, and then you could see either the creator just doesn't respond at all for months at a time. And then you see maybe they jump in and they're like, I'm ill, or I've been, this is what's been going on, and I'm sick and you're attacking me. And then there's this energy there, and it's just so frustrating. So if you are a collector of the independently produced decks, again, it's just like, you have to understand, like, these things are going to happen, and you have to either be okay with that, or you just have to make a decision of, like, maybe I'm gonna wait until the deck is already created and that sweet spot of the pre-order. Y'all don't know the sweet spot of the pre-order versus the Kickstarter. It's a gamble, but many times it pays off. And I've had a few times, like with the Delta Enduri, it paid off. Just saying. Just saying. Sometimes if you just wait for a minute and, like, you don't get caught up in all the emotions of, like, the investment part of it, the backing part, and you just slide on into that pre-order sweet spot where you get in with your decks right there with the backers, if not before. Just giving you guys some tips. That's all. All right. So another one. Now we're going to shift gears. Another one is loved ones who just don't understand. And speaking of, I'm going to have to pause because there's a loved one who just doesn't understand coming into the house. Sorry, I had to come back. It's not that my loved ones don't understand. My loved ones actually are the most understanding people. But in terms of when I'm in the central part of the house, they come in writing. And that means, in case you don't know, like, sometimes very rambunctious, loud, and I'm like, oh gosh, let me deal with them and then get them situated and then come back to recording. That's what I mean. But loved ones who just don't understand, that can encompass so many different things. Loved ones who don't understand you spending the money on decks. Loved ones who doesn't understand why you would even love decks to begin with. Loved ones who don't understand that you love tarot or oracle or, just the whole thing, and they're like, I just don't get it. And some of them are outright mean or just like judgmental, and you're like, I just want to live my life. I'm just trying to live my life. I just want to collect some decks and live my life. Why can't I do that? And so the dark side of collecting is sometimes dealing with other people's shit. That is the dark side of collecting. So yeah. So the next one is our shadow and not facing it. The dark side of collecting decks is sometimes when we're in an active state of collecting and acquiring without really giving any thought to why we need to bring those decks into our collection, why they need to be around us. What happens is over time we start to not face what we may be running from, what may be needing to be dealt with and addressed. And so what I invite people to do is to remember to, just understand why you're doing anything in life. The why. What is the why? You don't have to spend thousands of dollars on therapy to understand the why. Maybe you do, and there's no judgment there. But really, you got tarot cards and oracle cards to figure out the why. Why am I needing all these decks right now? Why do I need this deck right now? I plan on having a few different spreads as a part of my course to help us delve into that very question. And then that way, there's guilt-free purchases in your future versus, should I be doing this? Will my loved one understand? My loved one, my spouse has just told me, you bring another deck in here, I'm going to hurt you. No, I don't know what they're going to say. You know what I mean, though? It's like it becomes a shadowy type of thing after a while where we start to be sneaky and we don't let our loved ones know that we're bringing them into our collection. And then all of a sudden, oh yeah, that's not a deck. That's just whatever in the box. And then now you're like having shipments come to your job and all these different things where you want to not have to live like that. It shouldn't have to be like that. It should be very transparent. You should be able to know where you're at in your collecting habits and then also feel good about it. Not feel bad. Not feel bad about it. All right, we're almost nearing the end. So, the dark shadow is one aspect, but another part of it, and we touched upon it in the bright side of collecting decks, is the dopamine rush in the chase of the buy. The dopamine rush that we get when we are chasing a new deck, that is a bright side of things that does feel really good, but it's also a dark side of things. And it's why we get into a constant state of wanting to buy, because we're chasing that good feeling. But then what happens is you end up getting all these decks because of that good feeling, but then these are not necessarily decks that you're going to necessarily connect with later. And, yeah, maybe you end up selling some decks or trading them later and it's not a big deal. But for me, it's a big deal. It's a hassle. It's a hassle to have to sell decks off or to trade them or to give them. Well, not really to give them away. I actually love giving decks away to people. That's fine. But if I'm like, oh, this deck is not for the folks around me, I need to sell this deck. Now you've got the hassle of doing that. And it's just, why go through all of that? So the dopamine rush has a plus and a minus, right? It feels good. It feels great. We chase after that feeling all the time. But in the end, it's just chasing after a feeling. And finally, well, not finally. Oh, no. Oh, no. Yeah, so I have a couple of more. It can be a time suck to also collect decks. It can be a time suck to look for them. It can be a time suck to wait for them to be created or wait for them to be shipped or wait for them to be delivered or what have you. So just be mindful of that. That is a dark side too. It could be a dark side of fantasizing about decks, constantly looking on Etsy or Instagram for the newest deck. Now, as a collector, that's also a bright side. That's also a positive because it's a way we spend our time. But it then can become a dark side of things when it starts to take over. And another consideration is materialism and consumerism overshadowing the spiritual aspects of tarot and oracle reading. And there's definitely a lot to be said about that. I'm not going to go into that here. I'm just going to say that it is a dark side in terms of it's sometimes all that we talk about in certain Facebook groups is about the procurement, the materialism of collecting the deck versus actually using the deck. And so that can be a little, but that's okay too, because again, people are in acquisition mode and I may not be. So I might need to find a different Facebook group. And that's why my Facebook group, I hope to start to cultivate an environment where we start to utilize the decks that we already have and celebrate the new ones that come into our collections, but then also definitely utilize the decks that we already have. And finally, the dark side, lack of depth in the connection with the deck. Cannot underscore that enough. There are some decks that will just instantly we will connect with right out the box. We will start slinging cards, connecting on such a deep level, and there's some that will be a challenge, and there's some that there was never a connection to begin with because we made that purchase out of FOMO, or because we made that purchase because we had deck lust, or because we were in the dopamine rush chase. Buy, chase, buy, chase, chase, buy, buy, chase. It's this constant cycle going on and on. So, you know, that would be the dark side. It's just constantly having decks in our our collection that we wanted to have connections with, we wanted to use for readings, but then we don't. So that's it, guys. This video is long overdue. I wanted to do this for such a long time, but I knew it was going to be tied to, you know, this course. So definitely check out the course. It's free. So I think you're all going to love it. I'm going to do another video. Not in this moment. It's going to probably be another day because my husband's getting ready to make me some crab, and I'm super excited about that. But the next video that I'm going to make along this subject to continue the conversation is how to make your collection work for you. So we talked about the bright side of collecting, the dark side of collecting in this video, but now we are going to, the next topic is going to be how to make your collection work for you. And that is why you should also check out my course. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining me today. I can't wait to hear from you in the comments below, as well as in the conversations that we will have on the Facebook group or in the Facebook group, Abundant Life Tarot. And I'll see you all next time. Bye.